Welcome to the fifth and final episode in this mini-series. Today's topic is crucial for anyone using podcasting as a tool to grow their business. Measuring ROI, return on investment of your podcast. Now, when we think of podcast ROI, the first thing that comes to mind is probably the most obvious: listeners becoming paying clients, revenue, cash in your pocket. It's the dream scenario. Someone tunes into your show, loves what they hear, and decides to buy your services. We can all evaluate direct revenue from sales with just a couple of clicks. But I'm going to challenge you to broaden your view of ROI in this episode, because your podcast creates more in ROI than just direct sales. Go beyond the obvious with me. There are 8 non-traditional ways your podcast can deliver value, and I'll show you how you can actually measure the value for each in dollars and cents. The 8 non-traditional ways you can measure return on investment from your podcast are brand authority, client engagement, content repurposing value, networking opportunities, team morale and recruitment, lead nurturing, brand affinity, and market research. First on the list is brand authority. Brand authority is the level of trust, credibility, and influence your brand has within its own industry or market. It represents how well your brand is recognized as a leader or an expert in your field based on factors like expertise, reliability, and the quality of its products or services. A brand with strong authority is often the go-to source for information, recommendations, or solutions within your niche. Building brand authority involves consistently delivering valuable content, engaging with your audience on a consistent basis, and demonstrating your knowledge and expertise, which is exactly what you do when you host a podcast and show up in your ideal listeners' feeds each week. Over time, this authority leads to increased customer loyalty, more referrals, and often a higher willingness among customers to choose your brand over your competitors. To measure your podcast's ROI in this brand authority category, you might track mentions of your brand or your name in industry conversations, online forums, or even on social media. It's really easy to create a Google alert. I just did this for my brand the other day, and every time your name, your company name, or whatever you set an alert for are mentioned on the web, you find out immediately. Hosting a podcast can significantly boost your perceived authority and expertise, which can lead to speaking opportunities, media features, or collaborations. To put some measurable metrics to ROI pertaining to brand authority, track the following: how often you're mentioned in industry publications during a given period, how many backlinks your website has from affiliates, partners, interviewees, or clients, how many invitations you've received to speak at events, how many requests you've received to guest on other people's podcasts. If you haven't yet, find out what these numbers are for your business right now, like today. Because without a starting point, it's kind of hard to measure growth. You can easily assign a dollar value to each of these as well. For example, how much would you have to pay an SEO company to boost your web rankings using backlinks? $5K? 10K. The SEO guy I want to work with is $5,000 per month. So if your podcast earned you 5 new backlinks this year, that's an easy 5 to 10K in return on investment right there. Or think about it a different way. You get invited to speak at a conference or an industry event, and being on stage in front of 500 people results in 200 new email subscribers, 10 referrals, and 15 opportunities for coaching or direct client services. That's all money. Some of those email subscribers will convert into clients down the road. Not all referrals work out, so maybe 7 of those turn into clients. And then plus the 15 people that signed up for your direct services. At first, you might think, well, being on stage did that for me, not my podcast. But you've got to rewind even further. How did you even get invited to speak at that conference in the first place? Yeah, the podcast. The podcast elevated your brand authority, taking you down this trail of opportunity, and now you're seeing ROI. So as you'll soon see with all 8 of these non-traditional ROI categories, it's not always immediately obvious that the podcast is the source. But if you dig in, you'll see that it all stems from having a podcast in the first place. The second way you can have non-traditional return on investment from your podcast is through client engagement. Client engagement refers to the level of interaction, involvement, and emotional connection a client has with your brand, products, or services. It reflects how actively clients participate in and value their relationship with your business, which can be seen through regular communication, repeat purchases, and overall satisfaction. High client engagement typically leads to stronger loyalty, better retention rates, and more referrals, as engaged clients are more likely to continue using your services and recommend you to others. Engaged clients are also more responsive to new offers, feedback requests, and initiatives, making them valuable for long-term business growth. If you notice, for example, that clients stick around longer than they used to, or refer more of their friends your way, or are more apt to provide reviews for your services now that you host your own show, this is podcast ROI. You'll only notice better client retention, however, if you knew how long your average client stays with you in the first place. So starting metrics are important. If your typical client does business with you for about 6 months, and within a year of launching your own show, your average client engagement is 9 months, that's a big improvement. Of course, you could quantify the dollar value each client pays monthly and figure out what those additional 3 months really mean for your business, if you want to put a dollar to it. The other client engagement piece that's super easy to measure is a Net Promoter Score, or NPS. You've probably seen those pop-ups where you're asked how likely you are to recommend your product or service to others on a scale of 1 to 10, like one popped up for me with QuickBooks the other day. With this simple question and scaled answer from 1 to 10, you can measure customer loyalty, satisfaction, and enthusiasm. If you've had one of these surveys pre-podcast, because of course you need a starting metric to know if you've improved, and your scores now that you host a show are better, that's ROI from your podcast. Some of my clients podcast because of this category specifically, because they've figured out that listeners aren't finding them from the podcast and then converting them into clients because of the show, but that they're tuning into the podcast as a due diligence measure. So in this case, these potential clients of my client are already aware of what an agreement looks like, the pricing. They're pretty much ready to make a deal, but they're just checking in on who this person is, what they sound like, what their personality is. And they do that via the podcast just as a final checkbox before they sign on the dotted line. It's a credibility measure and it's working. Now, let's dive into content repurposing value, one of the most underrated ways to measure podcast ROI. Simply put, content repurposing is taking the material from your podcast episodes and transforming it into different formats like blog posts, social media, email newsletters, or even extra videos. This extends the reach of a single podcast episode, multiplying its impact across several platforms without requiring you to create from scratch for each one. The beauty of this strategy is that it maximizes the value of your original content. And when we talk about ROI, it's important to realize just how much you're saving by doing this. Instead of paying for a writer, a social media manager, a content creator for each of these different platforms, you can extract multiple pieces of content from one podcast episode. This is what I do with my own show. That's where the measurable value comes in. Now, let's think about how to assign dollar values to this. Let's say you've got a 30-minute podcast episode. From that episode, you pull the key points and you turn them into 5 different social media posts, 2 blog articles, and 1 email newsletter. If you were to hire a good freelance writer so that you get quality work to create these 2 blog articles from scratch, you're probably going to spend about $500. For those 5 social media posts, that could cost $250. And then an email newsletter, that's easily another $100. So instead of shelling out $850 for each of those pieces of content to be created individually, you've already produced the core material in your podcast episode. You can repurpose that content for free or the cost of your AI platform, saving all $850, or you can have my team create and repurpose that content for you, saving you about $400. Either route you choose, that's ROI of at least $400 per episode. All right, let's go bigger. Imagine you repurpose content from your podcast over the course of a month. So in 4 episodes, you gather enough material for 8 social media posts, 4 blog articles, and a weekly newsletter. If the cost to create that content separately would normally be about $2,000 a month for those separate services like we talked about earlier, but you're able to have someone from your team or mine do this for you, again, we save about half of that cash. So we're creating about $1,000 worth of value, and that's just for 1 month, added back to your marketing efforts, all from content you've already created. That's the power of content repurposing value. By reusing your podcast material, you're not just saving time, you're actually generating measurable savings. And over time, those savings add up, contributing to your overall podcast ROI in a way that really often gets overlooked. So if you're thinking about how to get the most from your podcast, Remember that every episode is more than just audio or video. It is a gold mine of content just waiting to be repurposed across your business's marketing channels. Not just for the current month or today, but reusable next quarter, in 6 months, next year. Not only are you creating episodes, but you're creating content for all the other platforms at the same time. The fourth way you might see non-traditional ROI from hosting your own podcast is in networking opportunities. In this context, networking opportunities refers to any connections, referrals, partnerships, any relationships built through your podcast. Whether it's guest appearances, collaborations, or simply just getting your name out there in front of the right people, podcasting opens doors you didn't even know existed. When you host a podcast, you're not just speaking to your audience, you're also engaging with other professionals and leaders in your industry by having them on as guests, by potentially sharing your content with them, or you might not even know it, but they're probably listening just to see what their competition's doing. These interactions can lead to new business partnerships, collaborations, or even high-value referrals that you would not have encountered otherwise. And when we're talking about ROI, these relationships can translate directly into revenue. Ready for some examples? Example 1. Imagine you invite a well-known expert in your field as a guest on your podcast. The conversation goes well, and after the episode airs, not only do they share the episode, but they introduce you to a key industry player who then becomes a strategic partner in your business. This partnership leads to a joint venture, and that brings in $20,000 in new business over the next year. That $20,000 can be directly tied back to the connection made through your podcast. A clear ROI from networking. Example 2. How about a different scenario? After featuring a guest who happens to be an industry influencer, they recommend your services to a colleague who's looking for exactly what you offer. That referral turns into a long-term client, generating $50,000 in revenue over the course of their contract. Without your podcast, that referral might have never happened. The $50,000 in revenue is another tangible return on investment directly resulting from the networking opportunities your podcast created. Do you think that influencer would have just chatted with you if you didn't have a podcast? No. At first glance, you think these are like really obvious examples of podcast ROI. However, most people forget about the podcast's position as the reason these connections were made. It's easy to mark this revenue down as a result of referral traffic or your own networking ability. But when you take the time to actually trace it back, neither of these scenarios would have occurred if it weren't for the podcast. These examples show how podcasting is more than just a content creation tool. It's a networking powerhouse. The relationships you build, the partnerships you form, and the referrals you receive can all contribute significantly to your business's bottom line. And when you assign dollar values to these successful connections, the impact on your overall podcast ROI becomes undeniable. So, as you continue to grow your podcast, keep in mind that each guest, each interview, and each connection you make could lead to networking opportunities with real financial benefits. Don't underestimate the power of these relationships. They might just be your podcast's most valuable asset. Fifth, we have team morale and recruitment. If there's anything more undervalued in business, I'd like to know. Team morale refers to the overall satisfaction, motivation, and enthusiasm of your employees or your team, while recruitment pertains to your ability to attract top talent. What does this have to do with your podcast? Quite a bit, actually. When your podcast highlights your company culture, values, and expertise, it not only resonates with your audience and the listeners that you're trying to reach, but also with your team. Don't you think that your employees take a few minutes to check out what you're doing each week? Employees take pride in being associated with a brand that's seen as a leader in its field, and this can boost morale, leading to better productivity, higher job satisfaction, and lower turnover. On the recruitment side, a well-produced podcast can showcase what makes your company a great place to work and attracting skilled professionals who share your values and mission. Imagine your podcast regularly features stories about the people behind the scenes in your business, their roles, challenges, and successes. Then your team feels recognized and valued, which boosts overall morale. As a result, turnover decreases by 10% over the year. If replacing an employee costs your company around $15,000 in lost productivity, hiring expenses, and training, that reduction in turnover saves you $45,000 if you just have 3 fewer employees leave each year. That's $45,000 in savings directly tied to the positive impact your podcast has had on team morale. Now, think about recruitment. Your podcast doubles as a showcase for your company culture, and it catches the attention of a highly skilled candidate who's been passively looking for a new opportunity. This person applies, they cite your podcast as a key factor in their decision to reach out. You hire them, and they quickly become a top performer, bringing in $50,000 in additional revenue within their first year. If recruiting this level of talent through traditional methods would have cost you $10,000 in recruitment fees, you've saved that and gained a high impact employee, making your total value to your company $60,000. These examples illustrate how your podcast can be a powerful tool for improving team morale and attracting top talent, both of which have direct financial benefits. A motivated team is more productive and loyal, reducing costly turnover, while a strong employer brand helps you recruit the best people for your business. Most business owners don't plan for team morale and recruitment to be impacted by their podcast. So they aren't even connecting the dots between content created for ideal clients and their employee recruitment retention situation. However, obviously, from these two examples, having a podcast can directly contribute to your company's growth and success. Remember that you're not just creating content. It's highly likely you're shaping the culture of your business and attracting the talent that will drive it forward. That's a return on investment you can't afford to overlook. Now let's talk about lead nurturing. Another key aspect of podcast ROI that can have a significant impact on your business is the way that you nurture leads. In this context, lead nurturing refers to the process of building relationships with potential clients at every stage of the sales funnel with the goal of moving them closer to making a purchase. Your podcast is a powerful tool for this, offering a consistent way to engage with prospects, provide valuable insights, and subtly guide them toward becoming paying clients. When done right, your podcast episodes can address common pain points, answer frequently asked questions, and showcase your expertise, all while keeping your brand top of mind for the listeners who are considering doing business with you. And when these listeners convert into leads and eventually clients, the ROI is very clear. Let's explore a couple of examples to see how this plays out in real terms. Suppose you create a series of podcast episodes that address specific challenges your ideal clients face. After listening to a few of these episodes, a listener downloads one of your lead magnets, like a free guide or a checklist, whatever you have made available to them. And that free guide is designed to solve a particular problem. This leads to a consultation booking and eventually, even a year later, a $5,000 contract. If you can trace this conversation back to the podcast episode and lead magnet, you've just added $5,000 in revenue directly attributable to your podcast's role in nurturing that lead. Now, something different. Imagine you run a podcast that regularly features case studies and success stories from your clients. One of your listeners who's been on the fence about using your services hears an episode that resonates with their situation. They reach out for more information, and after a few weeks of nurturing, they sign on as a client. And that brings in $10,000 in revenue over the course of the project. If your podcast was the catalyst for this decision, that $10,000 can be considered direct return on investment from your lead nurturing efforts through podcasting. These examples highlight how your podcast can be more than just an informative show. It can be a strategic tool for guiding potential clients through your sales funnel. By addressing their needs, showing your expertise, and staying engaged, you're effectively nurturing leads and increasing the chances they choose your services when they're ready to buy. If a potential client moves up just one or two steps in your funnel closer to making a purchase, with your podcast reducing the amount of time you have to spend nurturing them, what is that worth to you? If you're typically faced with, let's say, a 6-month nurture cycle from the time you meet a potential client until the time they sign an engagement, but your podcast reduces that time frame by 2 or 3 months, there's a dollar figure attached to that shortened time frame. Find it, and you'll find some serious, non-traditional ROI. All right, number 7 out of 8 ways you can find ROI dollars from your podcast. Brand affinity. Brand affinity is different from brand authority, which was discussed earlier. Brand authority focuses on your brand's credibility and expertise within the industry. Brand affinity refers to the emotional connection and loyalty your audience feels toward your brand. It's about more than just recognition. It's about creating a deep, lasting relationship with your listeners where they don't just know who you are, but they like and trust you too. This connection can lead to increased customer loyalty, more word of mouth referrals, and a higher lifetime value from your clients. Your podcast is a prime tool for building this kind of affinity. By consistently delivering valuable content that resonates with your audience, you're not only positioning yourself as an authority, but also as a trusted voice in their lives. This emotional connection is really hard to quantify, but it has real measurable impacts on your business's bottom line. Let's quantify your potential ROI from brand affinity with a couple of examples. Maybe you can find similarities in your business as well. Let's say you run a podcast that your listeners regularly tune into because it aligns with their values and needs. Over time, these listeners become more than just casual followers. They become brand advocates. Because of this strong brand affinity, they're more likely to choose your services over a competitor's. Say you have just 5 clients in a year who specifically mention your podcast as a key factor in their decision to work with you, and each of these clients brings in $8,000. That's $40,000 in revenue directly tied to the brand affinity you've cultivated through your podcast. Now, think about podcasting as a tool for fostering loyalty among your existing customers. Suppose you launch a new product or a service and you promote it through your show. Because of the strong emotional connection your audience has with your brand, they're a lot more inclined to try out your new thing. If 50 loyal listeners purchase this new offer, each of those contributing $500 in revenue, that's an additional 25 grand attributed to the brand affinity built through your podcast. When your audience feels connected to your brand, they're a lot more likely to choose you over your competitors, stick with you for the long term, and spread the word to others. Brand affinity might be tough to measure in this way because you don't always know who's mentioning you or why 50 people bought your new thing. But this is why it's important to ask potential and existing clients how they found you and if they're listening to your show each week. Going forward, recognize that every episode is an opportunity to strengthen the bond between your brand and your audience. This connection is not just about building trust. It's about driving revenue and sustaining growth for your business. Last section. Ready? The 8th and final way you can measure non-traditional ROI from your podcast is in market research. By engaging with your listeners through feedback, comments, and even the questions they ask, you can gather firsthand information that helps you understand what they want and need, what their preferences are, and especially their pain points. Your podcast provides a direct line to your audience, allowing you to test ideas, gauge their reactions, and refine your offering based on actual feedback. This not only helps you stay ahead of industry trends, but it also ensures that what you're offering is what they need. You want to hit the mark with your target market, and the insights you gain can be incredibly valuable, both in terms of refining your approach and making informed business decisions. As an example, imagine you discuss a new product idea on your podcast and you ask your listeners for feedback. Based on their responses, you decide to make a few adjustments before launch, avoiding some potential pitfalls and ensuring it meets their needs a little bit better. This adjustment leads to a successful launch and you end up bringing in $30,000 in revenue. Without that feedback from the podcast and from your listeners, you might have missed the mark on your launch. You would have had lower sales, or you would have maybe spent more on marketing to potentially never even reach that $30,000 mark. Now, that 30 grand in revenue can be directly tied to the market research you gained from your podcast. Now, consider another scenario where you used your podcast to explore emerging industry trends by interviewing experts and discussing new developments. This is something that I could do on my show. This market research helps you identify a growing demand for a particular service that you can offer. You quickly adapt, you introduce this new service ahead of anybody else in your field, and it generates an additional $20,000 in revenue over the next 6 months. The ability to identify and act on this trend through podcast-driven market research directly contributed to your business's growth. These examples show how your podcast isn't just content delivery. It's a dynamic tool for gathering market intelligence that can guide your business decisions and strategies. By actively listening to your audience and exploring industry trends through your episodes, you're better equipped to make informed choices that drive your business forward. If you want guidance on what to measure and how to find this information, let me know. I'm here to help. As we wrap up today's episode, let's quickly recap the 8 key opportunities for measuring non-traditional ROI from hosting a podcast. These are often overlooked, yet incredibly valuable ways your podcast can contribute to your business's success beyond just direct sales. For one, content repurposing value. Your podcast episodes aren't just audio. They are a goldmine of content that can be repurposed into blog posts, social media, newsletters, all kinds of things. This saves you significant time and money because you don't have to start from scratch for every tiny thing you want to create. Number 2, networking opportunities. Your podcast is a powerful networking tool, whether you're building relationships with guests, creating some new partnerships with industry professionals, or maybe you're receiving valuable referrals. These connections can lead to significant business growth and new revenue streams. The third non-traditional ROI metric is team morale and recruitment. Featuring your team and showcasing your company culture on your podcast can boost the morale of your existing team and help attract top talent to come in. A motivated team and a strong recruitment pipeline are crucial for long-term success in business, and your podcast can do both. Number 4, lead nurturing. Your podcast is an excellent platform for nurturing potential clients. By addressing their pain points and showcasing your expertise, you can guide listeners through the sales funnel, turning them into paying clients over time. Brand affinity. Podcasts help you build a deep emotional connection with your audience. You're literally in their ears or on their screens week after week. The more often they see you and hear you and get to know you, the more likely they're going to stick with you for the long haul. Brand authority. By consistently sharing valuable insights and expertise, your podcast establishes your brand as a leader in your industry. This credibility not only attracts clients, but it also opens up opportunities for speaking engagements, media features, and other forms of recognition. Number 7, client engagement. Regular podcast episodes keep your audience engaged, offering a consistent way that they can interact with your brand. This ongoing, repetitive engagement deepens relationships, builds trust, and ultimately increases client retention and lifetime value. Number 8, market research. Your podcast provides a direct line to your audience and allows them a direct line to you. They have the opportunity to offer insights, share preferences, ask questions, and, of course, provide feedback. This helps you make informed business decisions and stay ahead of the curve. You might even find yourself making adjustments to your current offers. Before we close, it's crucial to emphasize that to measure ROI in these areas, you need starting data points. Most business owners don't even know how many backlinks they have, how often they're mentioned online, or the level of engagement they're currently receiving. Without this baseline data, it's difficult to accurately measure the impact your podcast is having over time. So take the time to assess where you stand in each of these metrics right now so you can accurately track the growth and success that your podcast is bringing you. As you continue to build and grow your podcast, remember its impact goes far beyond just the number of listeners or how many monthly downloads or even the direct sales you are or aren't experiencing from your podcast. Each episode is the opportunity to drive these non-traditional ROI metrics in 8 different areas across your business. These different areas are often unmeasured or underutilized ways to create sustainability in your business. Podcasting isn't just about creating content. It's about creating value across multiple dimensions in your business. And that's the kind of ROI that truly makes a difference.